Now the exhortation or the charge for the seniors, and it is for the seniors. Graduates to be, you're almost there. In his own season, the New Hampshire winter of 2016-17 was no more threatening than usual. The cold that marked the time of early spring, however, was different. Indecisive, drawn out, discouraging. As you know, my family and I live on a dirt road, and I walk that dirt road when I'm not too preoccupied with the concerns of the day, or sometimes because I'm preoccupied with the concerns of the day. And in March, that road can become like a trail in Dante's ninth circle, icy, descending towards a frozen lake with howling winds and strange moans from the deep, dark waters as its icy crown shifts about. Worse than rule by bitter cold, winter maintained his sway over the land by shaking nature between ice and hints of warmth. This winter was particularly cruel and staged a fleeting hope of spring by parting the clouds and allowing the earth to thaw, only to seal her again beneath flowing ice. We called this mud season, and it makes all movement a plodding labor. The stalwart road keepers of my town struggled against this winter, but their efforts seemed to prolong his sterile realm as they poured thousands of pounds of gravel up and down my muddy road, and not just the road, but up and over the embankments and deep into the forest. Despite his retreat, winter seemed to have achieved his purpose. The forest floor along the road, which in April and early May should be bedecked in flowers and verdant life, was covered in barren rocks. For weeks I feared that my walks would be nothing but 4 seasons of trotting through a moonscape beneath a sad canopy of ash and oaks and maples, hemmed by pillars of pine, lacking all the small, ordinary flora that make a dirt road mirror the heavens. I dreaded that my little friends, starflower and wood anemone, would never return, nor anything living that might give a forest a vestment better than gravel. But then came a stirring that gave me back my hope. At first, almost imperceptibly, but growing with each day, a verdant army of ferns arose, led by Lady Fern, first awakening, and she called forth bracken and toothed fern, Dryopteris carthusiana, then cinnamon fern, and countless others. Now even the gravel is brought into communion, as nature sifts and spreads and matches each thing in silent order. Now it is spring. These ferns, in fact, have led me to a Richard Wilbur poem, which I did not know, Fern Beds in Hampshire County, a meditation on the appearance of ferns. Ferns which beat their spray about the base of every boulder, scale its creviced face, and wave on wave like some green infantry, storm all the slope as high as eye can see. Whatever at the heart of creatures makes them branch and burst apart, or at the core of star or tree may burn at last to turn and make an end of time, these airy plants, tenacious of their prime, dwell in swept recurrence of an ancient conquest shaken by first love, as when they answered to the boomed command that the seas green rise up and take the land. The presidential charge to the graduates of a college is typically a hymn to an imaginary college fabricated for the parents, or a stock speech imploring the graduates to live up to a talent that the president and most faculty have never seen because they never knew, cultivated, or loved their students. Here in Merrimack, on this campus, it's meant to be the final words, an overheard lecture, the parting plea of one teacher to his students. I spoke earlier, largely in merriment, of dates. Here's another date. Today is May 20th. It's the anniversary of something called Operation Dynamo. On the 20th of May in 1940, Winston Churchill was 10 days into the office of Prime Minister. The majority of the British Army, though itself undefeated, was surrounded in northern France due to the utter despair and disarray that gripped millions of French and Belgian troops on the British flanks. 400,000 men were retreating towards the seaside port of Dunkirk. Were they to be captured, the majority of British armament and trained soldiers would be removed from Britain's defenses. It's very likely that the spirit of appeasement would sap Parliament of its resolve, and the Second World War would end in complete victory for the powers of darkness. On May 20th, a then obscure British officer named Bertram Ramsay was asked to assemble a flotilla for the evacuation of Allied troops in France. Ramsay had about 36 trawlers, channel ferries, and light vessels. Most of the Royal Navy was in the Orkney Islands and protecting the sea lanes of the Atlantic. Early calculations indicated that about 40,000 men, a tenth of the Allied force, might be saved under the best of weather and combat conditions. Ramsay knew it would take some time to refit larger Royal Navy ships into effective transportation. Perhaps for the first time in its history, the Royal Navy would not arrive in time to save Britain. Word went up and down the eastern coast of England to the civilian population. Ramsay needed ships and volunteers. Now, in 1940, your average Englishman did not understand the monstrosity of Hitler. He did not understand treaty obligations. He did not understand the need to buy time to bring America into the war. The average Englishman understood that British boys needed to get out of a bad situation in France. To the average Englishman, Britain wasn't an imperial power holding the West together. Britain was his own back garden and 2 beers in the village pub. Britain was singing "Sportsmen Arouse" on Saturdays and "Be Thou My Vision" on Sunday. Britain was loved not because she was big, but because she was small. The king had said to his people in a recent radio broadcast that each household must be ready for sacrifice and service, that each would be called to do the right as they could see the right, and reverently commend their cause to God. About 700 little ships answered the call. Fishermen from forgotten harbors, bankers, shopkeepers who liked sailing on Saturdays, Bertie Woosters with their private yachts and pleasure boats, they all put out to sea. And with ships named like the Sundowner, the Royal Daffodil, the Bluebird of Chelsea, these ships took on all Hitler's fury. It's true that the great destroyers of the Royal Navy did arrive in time. It's equally true, however, that the German Air Force obliterated most of Dunkirk Harbor, and that only the little ships were able to get close enough to ferry men off of the beaches. For 10 days, the little ships sailed, manned by little men, brave little unknown men. They rescued not 40,000, which was the estimate, but nearly 400,000 British, French, and Dutch troops. More to the point, their actions and their story made them agents of hope for a king and a prime minister seeking to put courage back into the hearts of their people. How is it that you can be agents of hope? How is it that we can launch you out as little ships into such calamitous seas as we have in 2017? How is it that we look to you like tired men look to ferns after a long winter? How is it all going to work? I don't quite know, to be honest. Sometimes an education, a good education, such as you have received here, is best when it leaves you with a firm sense of mystery and the burden of questions. Facing a mystery and carrying a burden is good work when you have hope. But what is that? I am not entirely sure how you will do it. I do know that when I travel beyond our little pine cloister, fewer men and fewer women have hope, and that is a cause for sorrow and concern. On the natural level, hope is a passion or sentiment, a very noble one, a strong movement of your soul toward a good that is not present, but which could one day be present through sacrifice and effort and endurance. That ordinary hope rises up towards the supernatural virtue of hope, the graceful sentiment whereby we affirm with our entire selves that there exists a providential order and a merciful God who desires us to be with him in happiness for all eternity. Supernatural hope is what we want all men and women to experience. But we must remember that supernatural hope is experienced indirectly through the ordinary hopes of this world, the hope for safety and fellowship and roast beef and brown ale and singing and the sight of sunlight on the hair of your beloved. On July 1st, 1535, Thomas More was brought from the Tower of London to Westminster Hall to stand trial on 4 counts of treason. The trial is well documented and was at a later date dramatized in the well-known play and film A Man for All Seasons. There is no historian or lawyer today who will argue anything other than the trial was a travesty, a gross act of injustice in which the friends, peers, and political colleagues of Thomas More either voted for or assented to the execution of that innocent man. Most accounts, however, leave aside More's final sentence to the jury, which I believe captures the hope-filled spirit of our spiritual patron. More said, "More I have not to say, my lords, but that like the blessed Apostle Paul, as we read in the Acts of the Apostles, was present and consented to the death of St. Stephen, and kept their clothes that stoned him to death, and yet be they now both twain holy saints in heaven, and shall continue there, friends forever. So I verily trust, and I shall therefore right heartily pray, that though your lordships have now here on earth been judges to my condemnation, we may yet hereafter in heaven merrily all meet together to our everlasting salvation." St. Thomas More referenced the book of Acts, but of course, Acts does not tell us about Stephen and Paul dwelling merrily together in heaven. I wonder if our humanist saint was also mindful of Plato's attempts to describe the heavens as a common dwelling and a happy banquet of gods and men, a world like the earth, but only like the earth, an earth seen from the heavens, such as even the best poets have trouble describing. It is a heavenly banquet, according to Plato, marked by the radiant power of truth, filled with souls transformed by gazing upon what is true, after a length of long life, allowed to see the truth as it is, having spent that long life trying to embrace what is good and what is beautiful. Hope allows us to experience the firmness of truth, here and now, through our desire to be courageous and patient in moving towards the good and the beautiful. Whether it has been for 4 full years or just a semester or 2, you have felt the firmness of the truth in the ordinary embrace of ordinary things, like friendship, conversation, festivity, hard work, worship, and study. Those ordinary things we have lived out in communion with you and the saints, as an encounter with the living God who desires our good. Those ordinary vessels of grace are hidden under the stony face of our world. Your job, my charge, is to ask you to bring them forth in hope. Remember these days and those ordinary things. And in the years to come, you do the same. You do the same as we have been doing here together. Find friends from other good colleges and other families, good families, that are hidden throughout the country. And if you do remember, and I pray you do, Do so, live, so that you will branch and burst asunder the crust of the world. You will restore that first love to the world, that love which sets and sets and sets again and again and again the springs of life in motion. You will be heralds of hope. Now, I will conclude as I always have. It is the last austere act of the austere office of this college president to remind you of an irreducibly hard point of Latin grammar. You are no longer studentes, students, ones studying, a present participle. You are about to become alumni, ones nourished, a past participle. It is irrevocable, and it begins now. God bless you, seniors, graduates, now alumni. Desire the truth, know the truth, rejoice in the truth, and as you do so, remain in Christ, until I pray that with our patron we may merrily meet in heaven. You may move your tassels. You are now alumni.